Some movies bomb at the box office. These ones killed their studios. There's a movie so bad it bankrupted Lord of the Rings studio. A sci-fi flop so terrible the writer personally apologized for it. And Francis Ford Coppola built a fake Vegas indoors, lost millions, and then had to direct Godfather Part 3 just to pay off the debt. And the craziest part is, some of these movies weren't even the worst ones ever made. They were just expensive, in the dumbest possible way. And we're starting with a Roman epic so over the top, it nuked its studio 3 months after release and scared Hollywood off gladiator movies for 40 years. Right after Cleopatra almost took down 20th Century Fox, producer Samuel Bronston basically said hold my beer and made an even bigger Roman epic, The Fall of the Roman Empire. Directed by Anthony Mann, this thing was massive. They actually built an entire Roman Forum, 92,000 square meters, biggest outdoor movie set ever made at the time. They clearly wanted to top Ben-Hur, but the cost just exploded out of control. It was like a Marvel-level massive production without all the CGI spending. Starcast, huge set, Sophia Loren alone got paid $1 million. Only the second actress after Elizabeth Taylor to get that much. The movie cost around $20 million back then, that's basically $200 million now, and it tanked hard. Made less than $5 million back, about a quarter of what it cost. Just 3 months after release, Samuel Bronston Productions was completely bankrupt. Actor Stephen Boyd even blamed the movie for killing his entire career. It pretty much single-handedly ended the epic Roman genre in Hollywood. Took until Gladiator in 2000, almost 40 years later, for Hollywood to even think about making another Roman epic again. Funny thing is, Martin Scorsese actually loves this movie. He calls it the poignant beauty of a lost art and thinks everyone should watch it at least once. This might be Hollywood's most notorious disaster ever. Michael Cimino was riding high. The Deer Hunter had just swept the Oscars, made him Hollywood's golden boy. So United Artists basically gave him unlimited power, huge mistake, to make an epic western called Heaven's Gate. It was originally supposed to cost around $7 or $11 million, depending who you ask. But Cimino went completely off the rails. He rebuilt entire sets because something didn't feel right, literally moved full-grown trees around for his camera shots, demanded 50, even 60 takes of tiny scenes. By the end, he'd shot over 220 hours of footage, and the budget had ballooned to $44 million. Crazy money at the time. The final cut was this super long, messy 3-hour and 39-minute Western epic that people completely hated. It grossed only $3.5 million, one of the worst box office flops ever. United Artists was financially destroyed and ended up forced to sell to MGM just a year later. Producer Lou Grade famously said it would have been cheaper to just lower the Atlantic than film this movie. And he probably wasn't joking. They actually built a 55-foot-long, hyper-detailed replica of the Titanic to raise it up out of the water. They built one giant tank for $350,000, but when the model was done, they realized it didn't even fit. So they had to build an even bigger tank for another $6 million. This tank held over 10 million gallons of water, cost just about as much as building the real Titanic itself back in 1912. But all that money and effort wasn't enough. The movie itself was just slow, boring, no suspense. Critics hated it, audiences ignored it, and it grossed a measly $7 million. Lou Grade's studio, ITC Entertainment, was so damaged financially they were forced to sell off their entire film distribution arm just to avoid bankruptcy. Author Clive Cussler, whose novel the film adapted, despised it so much he refused to sell rights to any more of his Dirk Pitt novels for decades. When he finally did, in 2005, the movie was Sahara, which he also ended up hating. Francis Ford Coppola actually has a long history of bombing big time at the box office. Before his recent flop Megalopolis, he had One from the Heart, a Vegas-set musical romance. After dominating the 70s, Coppola went into the 80s with this incredibly ambitious personal project. He borrowed heavily from banks to finance the thing, even built elaborate Vegas sets from scratch on his own Zoetrope Studios lot. Costs skyrocketed up to $27 million. Massive money at the time. But audiences who loved his gritty 70s classics just didn't know what to do with a candy-colored musical romance. It grossed just under $700,000. Zoetrope Studios never recovered. Coppola spent the next decade doing movies just to pay back those debts, even stuff he clearly didn't really want to do, like Godfather Part 3. By 1992, Zoetrope filed for bankruptcy a second time, all because of the debts from this one movie. Coppola later said that the version initially screened for studios was actually unfinished, calling it a total mess that never got a fair shot. But here's the ironic thing. He recently announced he's actually making another musical next, set in the 1930s this time, and he's doing it super cheap because after Megalopolis, he's out of cash again. Guess some guys never learn. By the late 80s, Cannon Films was already a sinking ship. They'd lost around $90 million between 1985 and 1986, and somehow thought buying the Superman rights might turn things around. Didn't exactly go as planned. They slashed the budget of Superman 4 down from $30 million to about $17 million, and it showed on screen. Terrible effects, cheap production values, just overall awful. When it finally hit theaters, people pretty much stayed away. Made just about $15 to $19 million in the US and barely cracked 30 worldwide, way below expectations, especially compared to earlier Superman films. Cannon was already barely holding on, but this disaster was the final nail in the coffin. By 1989, Cannon Films was officially done. Superman himself couldn't even rescue them. The movie still sits at 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, which honestly seems generous. Aurora Productions started out promisingly enough, founded by former Disney execs James Stewart and Rich Irvine. Their first film, The Animated Secret of NIMH, actually did well, but everything after that pretty much tanked, especially their live-action movies. By 1990, Aurora was basically betting everything they had left on this beach volleyball dramedy called Side Out, starring Thomas C. Howell. They genuinely thought beach volleyball was going to be the next surfing. Huge miscalculation. Director Peter Israelson literally called volleyball the sport of the 90s, promising audiences excitement and athleticism. Executive producer Jay Weston had spent over 6 years developing it, convinced the timing was absolutely perfect. But turns out volleyball wasn't exactly the cultural phenomenon they thought. Side Out barely scraped together $400,000 at the box office. Aurora Productions folded immediately after. This pirate movie, starring Geena Davis and Matthew Modine, wasn't just a flop. It was a legendary disaster. Guinness Book even named it Hollywood's biggest ever financial loss at the time. Carolco Pictures, the independent studio behind huge hits like Terminator 2 and Total Recall, blew almost $100 million on this thing, but the production was a nightmare from start to finish. Originally, Michael Douglas was attached. He dropped out when he couldn't get equal screen time with Geena Davis. Davis herself wanted to quit too, but couldn't because of her contract. Director Rennie Harlan, Davis's husband at the time, spent $1 million of his own money just rewriting the script. Audiences and critics absolutely trashed it. Opening weekend, it didn't even crack the top 10. Total box office was just $10 million in the US, maybe $16 million worldwide. A month after it came out, Carolco filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The studio was done. Pirate movies themselves were dead too, at least until Pirates of the Caribbean finally revived the genre almost a decade later. Just a few years after reviving his career with Pulp Fiction, John Travolta basically threw it away again with this ridiculous sci-fi disaster based on an Ron Hubbard novel. Travolta even invested $5 million of his own cash into this train wreck. It bombed spectacularly, won pretty much every Golden Raspberry Award it was nominated for, and wiped out any possibility of a sequel. Then things got worse. Franchise Pictures, the studio behind it, was later sued for inflating the movie's budget from $44 million up to $73 million, defrauding investors. Turns out, most of the cash probably just went straight into Travolta's paycheck anyway. The movie itself is notoriously terrible. Original screenwriter J.D. Shapiro literally apologized for it in the press, even accepted its award for Worst Movie of the Decade, proudly calling it the suckiest film ever. Barry Pepper blamed it all on a bad script and lousy production values. Travolta hilariously called it like Star Wars, but better, and even compared it to Schindler's List. By 2004, Franchise Pictures was bankrupt, completely shut down by 2007. Not only was Battlefield Earth a giant financial disaster, it literally destroyed the studio behind it. The early 2000s had plenty of bombs, but none bigger at the time than Spirits Within. The video game company behind the famous Final Fantasy games decided to start their own film studio, Square Pictures. This was going to be their groundbreaking animated masterpiece. Photorealistic computer-generated imagery, years ahead of its time. It required huge production, 4 years to make, nearly 1,000 computers running nonstop to render all 140,000 frames of animation. Then it finally released and bombed at the box office. It made around $85 million globally, but that was nowhere near enough to cover a massive $137 million budget. Square Pictures literally collapsed under the weight of that loss, shutting down immediately afterward. Apart from a short segment in The Animatrix, they never made another movie. Square ended up merging with Enix in 2003 just to survive financially. Warner Brothers feature animation was created in the 90s, trying to chase the success Disney was having with animated films like Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. But ironically, Warner's own classic Looney Tunes characters would be exactly what sank the whole division. Back in Action was supposed to be the next Space Jam, part animation, part live action, directed by Joe Dante. But Warner Brothers meddled nonstop, hated Dante's cut, forced reshoots, completely changed the ending. Brendan Fraser later described it as soul-crushing, said Warner publicly humiliated him during production. It bombed spectacularly at the box office. $80 million budget made just around $68 million worldwide. Right after that, Warner Brothers feature animation was done. How the hell does the studio behind Lord of the Rings manage to go bankrupt? Seems impossible, right? But just 4 years after Return of the King, that's exactly what happened to New Line Cinema. Thanks entirely to one giant mistake called the Golden Compass. New Line wanted a Harry Potter-level franchise, so they went all in, spending a studio record $180 million adapting Philip Pullman's popular fantasy novel. And at first glance, it looks like it actually did pretty good. $372 million worldwide box office. But here's the thing. New Line made an insane financial decision. To help fund production, they sold away all international distribution rights, meaning they could only cash in on the domestic take. And domestically, the movie bombed, making just $70 million. This massive financial disaster was the final straw for New Line. Without another huge hit coming, founder Robert Shea had no choice but to merge his once powerful studio with Warner Brothers just to avoid total bankruptcy. Warner absorbed New Line completely, fired around 90% of the staff, including Shea himself, and New Line lost all independence. One flop was all it took to kill a major Hollywood studio's autonomy. Fox Animation Studios started strong in the late 90s with Anastasia, actually giving Disney some real competition. But by 2000, things had gotten rough. Most of their employees had already been laid off just before their big sci-fi epic was even released. With a budget around $75 million and big-name voice talent like Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore, Fox clearly hoped this would save them. Instead, it was a massive flop, barely made half its budget back, around $37 million worldwide. People just didn't show up. It got so bad that Fox shut down the entire animation division literally 1 week after the movie opened. Whole departments found out they were laid off by voicemail. All upcoming projects were scrapped immediately. Animation was changing fast at this time anyway. Pixar was reshaping things with computer animation, and traditional hand-drawn movies like this were already on life support. Titan was the final nail in the coffin, marking one of the biggest animation disasters ever, instantly ending Fox Animation for good. In 2008, Nicolas Cage starred in Bangkok Dangerous, a remake of a 1999 Thai action movie. Cage produced it himself, played this stoic hitman, and nobody cared. Critics shredded it, audiences ignored it, and the film completely tanked. It actually opened at #1 at the US box office, but only because nothing else came out that week. Then it dropped almost 70% in week 2, made just over $42 million worldwide against a $45 million budget. Disastrous performance. The studio behind it, Virtual Studios, was still really young, started in 2005. They had actually financed some really solid movies before this, Blood Diamond, V for Vendetta. But after the massive flop of Bangkok Dangerous, the entire company shut down less than a year later. They literally closed the studio's doors forever in 2009. One Nicolas Cage misfire and that's it. No more studio. Hollywood keeps making Mars movies and they almost always bomb. But Mars Needs Moms in 2011 was an entirely new level of disaster. Disney teamed up with Robert Zemeckis' Image Movers digital studio to make this insanely expensive animated movie. $150 million on this creepy, hyper-realistic motion capture technology that Zemeckis loved. When it opened, audiences were completely freaked out by how weirdly unsettling the animation looked, and the movie made just $39 million globally. Not even a third of what it cost to make. One of Disney's biggest financial failures ever. But here's the funny part. Disney actually saw this coming. Even before the movie came out, they cut ties with Image Movers Digital, shut it down entirely, fired 450 staff, canceled all projects in development. Once the movie flopped as expected, the studio closure became permanent. Zemeckis' obsession with motion capture basically died with this film.